So let's move on to our program. Tonight's program is the Silk Mills of Emmaus, their history, heritage, presented by Jeanne Harakal. I'm sure many of you know Jeanne, who's been an integral part of the Emmaus Historical Society for many years as a board member and past president and current board member. She has a wealth of knowledge in many areas of the history of our community. She is now adding silk mills to that list after a lot of research. So please welcome Jeanne.
Yeah, as Linda hinted, I offered to do this program because we've had so many years people have been asking for a silk mills program. And I thought, well, I don't know too much about silk mills, but I certainly can see what I can find out. So it has been a journey, a lot of research. I will tell you there is no book on the silk mills of Emmaus. There's very little on the internet. There's a few things listed in the history of Lehigh County, but my biggest resource on this was, believe it or not, newspapers.com.
Oh yeah.
So it's been interesting. I haven't been able to piece everything together to my satisfaction. There's a few little question marks I have yet. But there's a good amount of information tonight, so we'll take a journey. This is a colorized postcard that's up there of the Dairy Silk Mill, one of the silk mills in Emmaus, so just so you know what we're looking at. The silk industry was drawn to the Lehigh Valley for a few reasons. Number one, there was water here. Number two, there was power. Number three, there was labor. The spinning machines required constant tending and provided jobs that suited women and children of that era. And because of this, the silk mills had a tendency to be located near mines and heavy industry because that would attract men who would then bring their wives and their children. So just so you can understand kind of the whole thought process back in the late 1800s, how the owners of silk mills were trying to figure out where they were going to work. The Lehigh Valley also had a substantial immigrant population, which was cheap labor. So the silk industry began in the Lehigh Valley in 1881. And by 1900, there were 23 silk mills in the Lehigh Valley. Of those 23, there was one in Emmaus. The first one that opened in Emmaus opened in 1892. So the silk industry in Pennsylvania peaked in the late 1920s due to the cheap labor, mainly from the immigrant workers' children and wives. However, after the Great Depression, increasing labor unrest, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, and competition from other textile industries began to affect the silk industry. So by 1953, Allentown had become the #1 silk city in the world, but even then, the number of silk mills had decreased. There were only 6 silk mills that continued to work at that time. Okay, so we went from lots of silk mills to very few. This is, I've clipped a few things from the morning call from newspapers.com. One of the things here shows the beginning in 1892, the silk industry developed in the borough. This is a little history. This is from 1934, but they're telling a little bit of Emmaus history and Emmaus silk history. As of 1934, as of July 28, 1934, the records reveal there is 1 loom for every 6 persons in the town. Imagine that. And the pioneer of the silk industry here, which we'll get to, which was Keystone Silk Mills, was Paul Gumbinner Company. And he owned, it was presently here in 1934, it was owned and operated by H.D. Tremblau, so it had changed hands by that time. There were 5 silk mills and 1 throwing mill in Emmaus, and it employed more than 900 people. So the silk mills in Emmaus in 1934 were Tremblau, which originally was Keystone, and we're going to get to all of these, Frederick, Zollinger and Schroff, Witter Brothers, Greig Tex, and the Emmaus Throwing Company. So we're going to start with the Keystone Silk Mill, which opened in 1892. Keystone Silk Mill was located at Keystone Avenue and East Minor Street. This is a picture of the front of the mill. You can see a few people sitting, possibly, if you can point them out, and sitting in the grass in the front of the mill. So there was a family that lived at the mill, and that's why you're seeing some of the awnings there and some of the things on the grass there. The mill was established by Paul Gumbinder, as I had said. He was working in the silk business in New York. People that were doing silk mills here, a lot of them either came from New York or New Jersey. Mr. Gumbinder recruited E.A. Stansfield, who was working in Midland Park, New Jersey, to be the superintendent at Keystone. And the mill originally employed 250 workers who worked on silk looms. They also wove dress goods, and they did ribbons. So from the beginning, the mill was a great success and had to be enlarged 6 times in the first 15 years for their expanding operations. And here's just a little blurb in the Allentown Democrat from September 7th, 1892, just the formal opening of the Keystone Silk Mill, the new silk mill in Emmaus. This is one more view of the silk mill. Now you don't see awnings, you don't see anything coming out of the windows. This is the back of the silk mill, more where the workers were, and the front was more showing kind of where the family lived. These are 2 pictures of E.A. Stansfield, who was the superintendent of Keystone. The first picture is a tintype. And these are things we have in our collection at the Emmaus Historical Society. We have been very fortunate with some of the donations that we've gotten. E.A. Stansfield was born in Manchester, England in 1843. And he learned the business of silk weaving because his father and grandfather were silk weavers their entire times. The photo on the right is a little bit later photo of him. I've always been amazed, and this is just me, at the beard he has, because it's divided in the middle. And I will tell you, from the time he was young until the time he was old, he had that beard. So you will see more pictures of him coming up. This is a photo of Manchester, England, where he left. And then also E.A. Stansfield. This is a business card he had later in life. So you can see how long the beard got and how divided it got. In 1869, he married Mary Helen Kniveton, after which they took a honeymoon to America and they never left. Having grown up in the silk weaving business, he was able to establish his own business in New Jersey, at which he ran for 4 years until he was recruited to oversee the Keystone Silk Mill in Emaus. With his knowledge of all aspects of the business, he was able to direct the employees to produce the best and the highest quality result with a minimum effort. Mr. Stanfield and his wife Mary had 10 children. 6 of them worked in the silk industry in various positions. One was an assistant foreman at Keystone Silk Mill. Another became foreman in the warping department. 4 others worked as a loom repairer, a twister, a cloth inspector, and a mechanical engineer. E.A. Stansfield also took an active role in the business community. He served as director of First National Bank of Emaus and of the Emaus Mutual Fire Insurance Company. And in 1900, he was elected Chief Burgess of Emaus for a period of 3 years, which he served successfully to the satisfaction of the residents of Emmaus. Now, for some people who are not familiar with the term Burgess, It's kind of a predecessor of the term mayor. He was one that was helping to run the town. This is a 1907 Ford touring car. It is parked, he's not driving it right there, it is parked near the Keystone Silk Mill on Minor Street, and that is his wife, Mary. Now, Mr. Stanfield passed away in his home. He lived at 149 Main Street in Emmaus. He passed away in 1933 at the age, the nice age of 90 years, 7 months, and 13 days. So he lived to a very nice old age. All right, so now we're going to meet some of the mill workers. In the first picture, this is an inside look of most of the women who are working the looms in the mill. You can see how they're dressed. This is late 1800s, early 1900s. They're all wearing long dresses. Some of them have aprons on, but that's how they dressed to come to work at the silk mill. And then on the right, this is the engine room gang, and that was what was written on the back of the picture. So these were the folks that were keeping some of the engines working. They were using a lot of coal, firing things up, but that's just two very distinct pictures of the mill workers. There were many different jobs at the mills. Okay, this is an inside look of the mill, circa 1903, and at the bottom left, in the front of the picture, is E.A. Stansfield, standing there in the mill. And maybe you can see his beard a little bit there. But nice view of the mill, the way it worked. This is also another interior of the factory with the women and the machinery. It was, quite. I look at something like this, and the amount of machinery and how much they had to build everything was just amazing. Okay, and this is Keystone Management. So I'm going to point out a few things to you. Left to right, we have Robert Stansfield. I wonder who he's related to. And we have Edward Messenger, and I'll explain who he's related to. Len McElroy, Ernest Stansfield, and Harold Stansfield. Robert Stansfield in later life became a Moravian church minister. So after he left the silk industry. Edward O. Messenger was a son-in-law of E.A. Stansfield. And the other two were, I believe, one was a son and one was a brother. So you had quite a few family members running the business. Okay, so the Keystone Silk Mill workers, this photo was from 1905 to 1907. Now, if you look at the photo, you'll see that they are a little bit better dressed. So you have some men there with ties. This may have been a social gathering. That's my assumption. I don't think it's a gathering from after work. But just wanted to point out to you, this was written on the back of the photo, that the hours they worked were 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., 12 hours a day. The annual average male wages in the silk mill, $485 a year. $485 a year. The female wages, $345 a year. And the child wages, $143 a year. So here's another photo. This is of the workers outside. You can see them more dressed for the factory work. I want to point out in the very front row, sitting on the grass, you see a lot of children. You can see some children, I think there's a few in the back and also maybe in the windows. So this was taken at the back of the silk mill, based on the windows that you see here. It's not the front. At this point, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the 1800s, the late 1800s, and what the labor was like back then. Child labor was common throughout Pennsylvania, especially in the silk mills, and many families depended on the additional income for subsistence. So between 1880 and 1925, the value of silk mill products manufactured in Pennsylvania increased tenfold. But at this time, working children were the cheapest form of labor to maximize their profits. In 1876, roughly 30 silk manufacturers opened plants in Pennsylvania, largely due to the availability of child labor and the lack of concern for children in the wage labor force. Very sad times. By 1907, children comprised roughly 30% of the labor force throughout the Pennsylvania silk mill industry. Many were under the legal working age of 12. Legal working age of 12. So, under that. Child labor persisted throughout the early 1900s, but reform to keep children in school and out of silk mills began. So eventually, legislation was passed limiting hours of work and types of employment for young people and helped to set a minimum legal working age. Between 1900 and 1920, the changes were slowly implemented but suffered setbacks. So children's wages began to grow, and soon after, children between the ages of 12 and 15 were slowly phased out of the silk labor force. In 1925, around the Lehigh Valley, the study of the immigrant women conducted by the Department of Labor showed there was a large shift in the number of wives and mothers that occupied the positions in the silk mill industry. So a lot of the wives and mothers were staying home and the children were working in the silk mills. So that started to change. And in the early 1900s, the silk mills employed a large population of girls under the age of 18 who worked to financially support their families. This was not as prevalent in the Emaus silk mills, thank goodness, as it was in Allentown and Bethlehem. By the 1920s, the age of women changed as the laws pushed the girls out of the industry. So the shift from child labor to adult married women occurred around this time, right around the 1920s. Wages at silk mills were often much lower than what was needed to support a family. So in the late 1920s, it was widely acceptable to see women work outside of the house to provide additional income for families. And young children were then able to maintain more years of schooling. So I'll just tell a quick story here. My grandfather, turns out, was a silk mill worker. When I was growing up, he was the janitor at Jefferson School. And I always thought that's what he was, the janitor at Jefferson School. But as I was doing my research here, I decided, yeah, you know what, let me go and research him a little bit. So I researched not only him, but also his family. In 1910, his two older brothers and one sister were already working in the silk mills. Now they were 17, 18, and 16. So one was a quiller and two of them were weavers. But then in the 1920 census, I found my grandfather. And at 17, he was a silk mill weaver. Then I thought, okay, well, you know, I'm sure by 1930, he's working somewhere else. 1930, he was still a silk mill weaver. 1940, he was still a silk mill weaver. And 1950, he was still a silk mill weaver. So all the time I knew my grandfather, he never talked about working in the silk mill, but he worked in the silk mill over 30 years. The other thing that was interesting was in 1910, there were 4 people that were living with my grandfather and his family. 4 people were working in silk mills that lived in the same residence as my grandfather and his family. My grandfather was one of 11 children. So it was his parents, it was 11 children, and then it was his grandparents, all living in the same house. And 4 of them were working in silk mills to support the family. In 1920, it was the same thing. So they needed the income from whoever was living to be able to support the family. This is just an example I pulled out just a few silk mill jobs, things that I wasn't sure what they were. So you have a thrower. That person does cleaning and winding and twisting of raw silk threads into some sort of yarn, and that's called then thrown silk. You have a spinner, and these are the ones that actually start with the cocoons in a hot tub of water and then ease the thread and wind that onto bobbins and then twist it further to create different yarn choices. You have a quiller, and my great aunt was a quiller. I had never heard of a quiller. You are winding silk threads or yarn onto small spools called quills, which are then used in the weaving looms. And then, of course, you have the silk mill weaver. They operated the looms in the silk mill to create the fabric. Okay, this is one more picture of the silk mill workers at Keystone. This is now in front of the factory. Now to the right of the porch is James Stanfield. Sorry, James Stanfield. He's in the window to the left of the porch. The Stanfield family lived above the mill, so if you look at the window above the porch, you can see curtains. Most of the people in this picture are fairly well dressed. If you look at some of the men's hats, they have the old straw kind. They're holding them. But this was some sort of get-together for the silk mill workers. And there were quite a few of them getting together from the factories. Okay, so that window that you saw that jutted out with the curtains, this is the room behind the window. This was the sitting room. This is where the Stansfield lived. You'll notice there's a piano in it. There's the wallpaper is on the walls. You have carpeting. So it was, pretty much a well-to-do family that lived there. And then here's the Keystone Silk Mill with the Stansfield family in the foreground. They're behind the fence there. But I just wanted to show you a little different view. We had the workers off to the left of the porch. We showed you the windows above the porch with the curtains, and this is all of the factory to the right of the porch. So this is a couple little blurbs of the Allentown Democrat News. A new silk mill is going to be built in Emaus by Excelsior, June 1911. Well, the first one says they're getting ready to start building the silk mill, and it's going to be on Walnut Street and Macungie Avenue, if everybody can picture that. And then the second one, they're both from June of 2011. One is June 3rd and the other is June 20th. The second one, 2 weeks later, they've already stopped. Okay, no new silk mill. So the Keystone Silk Mill was actually purchased by Excelsior Silk Company. They were the ones that were building the new mill, but instead they purchased the Keystone Mill because the owner of the Keystone Mill had died in 1910. Now the Stansfields, they were the owners of Excelsior Silk Company, or they were trying to put together Excelsior Silk Company. So they came out with these bonds to try to raise money. And the bonds were either to build, or they were to expand, or they were to repair. So that's what the silk mill bonds were all about, a way of raising money. So what happened was, in September of 1911, instead of building that new silk mill at Walnut and Macungie Avenue, they ended up purchasing the factory that they had worked in for so long from the estate of Paul Gumbiner. This is just another certificate. It's the other side of it. Stock certificate, bond certificate. And this was purchased, 10 chairs were purchased by Harold Stansfield. So even people in the company were purchasing these bonds. Okay, 2 years later, the Excelsior Silk Company is supposed to be, or is to be sold. That's according to the Allentown Democrat, January 1913. They overproduced silk, so they had an overabundance of silk to sell. So they had to close production because they were making too much silk and weren't able to sell it. So that was 1913. The next thing I saw, or that I could see, as far as the purchase of Excelsior, was 1922. So it took 9 years before Excelsior went out of business and was then purchased by H.D. Tremblau. And this is another stock certificate. This was an ad I found in the morning call. The H.D. Tremblau, manufacturer of silks. You'll notice they had, they listed the mill in Emaus. There's one in Fleetwood, but their main office and their sales office was New York City. All right, so this is a really good story that I dug up. Kind of sad, but you know, this is what happened. There was a night watchman, and this occurred not in the main Keystone or Excelsior or Tremblau silk mill. It did not occur in that main mill. It occurred in a building they had on South 2nd and Golden Streets, which is no longer there, okay? And the building was used to store silk products. So it was a storage building. There was a night watchman. His name was Wilson Knaus, maybe a relative of some people here, maybe not, but remember that name. He was an elderly gentleman, and at 2 o'clock in the morning he was doing his rounds, and he was you know, putting coal into the furnace. He was in the basement, and he was very surprised by armed robbers. So they had pistols, and they chained and handcuffed him to a steam pipe. Now, luckily for him, it was night, and they kept the building cooler, so the steam pipe wasn't super hot. But then they proceeded to steal $12,000 to $15,000 worth of silk products. Now imagine how much that is back then. $12,000 to $15,000 was just unbelievable. They had a big truck. The theft that was around 2 a.m. The theft wasn't discovered until 5 a.m. So nobody was there. The night watchman was alone. He couldn't get unhandcuffed. He couldn't get unchained. Oh, and they put a silk bag over his head. So luckily, someone did come in at 5 o'clock, and Wilson Knaus was unharmed, but he was of an advanced age, so they were very concerned about him. The police chief who investigated this was Robert Diesch. Anybody related to the Diesches? No? Okay. And some people reported to Robert Diesch that they saw a truck heading down Broad Street towards Veracruz. And the assumption was, and of course this is like, you know, 2:30 in the morning. The assumption was that they were heading to Philadelphia. Consequently, 3 hours later, they were never caught. But the one thing I was amazed at with this article as well, and I know you probably can't read it, but in a little bit smaller print than the main headline, it talks about H.D. Tremblau, who's the head of the company, being a well-known horse fancier. Now, what does that have to do with his company getting robbed and his employee getting, you know, not beaten up, but, you know, handcuffed and tied to a steam pipe? Anyway, I thought that was a very interesting little story. Okay, now we're fast forwarding to 1933, and now this is the time where people start going on strike at the silk mills, because now the working conditions, the wages are starting to come into play. So At the time, there were 4 silk mills on strike, which is about 500 workers in Emmaus. The silk mills that were on strike were Tremblau, which was the Keystone, Frederick, Tremont, and Greitex. And there were 2 other silk mills that were not on strike, and that was Zollinger and Schroth and Emmaus Throwing Company. So from one day to the next, first they have 2 that are going to settle, and then they have 3 and almost 4. So eventually, in July 1933, they did reach a settlement with the silk workers. Okay, and then later, H.D. Tremblau becomes the Emmaus Silk Mill. I was having a real time trying to keep track of when or what, or, you know, so the silk mills definitely changed names over the years many times. So this is a colorized picture, once again, of the Keystone, H.D. Tremblau, Emaus Silk Mill. You can see it is labeled, it is at the time of the Emaus Silk Mill, so. All right, I did this for every silk mill I could. I went out and I took a current day picture. So, H.D. Tremblau, Keystone, that silk mill became later a ribbon mill. Some people may remember the ribbon mill that was there in the 40s. It also became Lehigh Safety Shoe, and it became 7th generation charter school.
And
Most
Rodale,
people today
Rodale
would.
was in there for 10 years.
What's that?
Rodale was in there for 10 years.
Rodale was in there.
I worked underneath.
Okay.
those-
All right. I missed Rodale in there.
They
Okay.
never owned it, they leased
There was
it.
another company too.
Another one?
TED. They used to do silk screening on different products, like
Okay.
Tickle, deodorant.
Before 7 Gen?
Yeah, before
Yeah.
Rodale.
Before Rodale?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so, all right. So we have a few more companies that were in that building. And it's still standing, but you know, you can see it's not 2 stories anymore, you know, like it was.
No, that was behind the 2-story part.
Oh,
Yeah, but they
okay.
did at some point take the 2nd story off.
Take the
because
2nd story
When I
off.
worked in there, the front was also 1 story.
Right, right. All right, now we're going to the 2nd silk mill in Emmaus. So we went from 1892, the next silk mill, Dairy Silk Mill, opened in 1906. It was located at 6th and Minor Streets. And this is what the Dairy Silk Mill looked like. And we can thank J.H. Moore, that wonderful Emaus photographer who also made postcards for a lot of the pictures that we have on the slides today. This is D. George Dairy. He was the founder of the Dairy Silk Mills. This is not an Emmaus Historical Society photo, okay? All right, we weren't lucky enough to have one of those. We had some of Stansfield, but not of Dairy. So this actually came out of the history of Lehigh County. But he was the founder of the Dairy Silk Mills, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him. The first dairy silk mill in the Lehigh Valley was built in Catasauqua in 1897. His first name was Desiderius George Dairy, and he immigrated from Europe in 1886. In 1892 to 1897, he became superintendent in a silk mill in Paterson, New Jersey, one of the silk capitals. And in 1897, he opened his first silk mill in Catasauqua. In 1906, he opened the Dairy Silk Mill in Emmaus, 6th and Minor Street. By 1919, George Dairy had 42 silk mills, 6,500 looms, and 10,000 workers. He was the single largest private manufacturer of silk in the world. Private manufacturer. All right, so here's just a couple of photos from the inside. This is the Dairy Silk Mill Superintendent, Charles Goldman. He's 58 years old in there. He's seated in the middle of the photo. We have the bookkeeper to his right, Robert Stoneback. Some people may know that name. And then we have Mildred Mary to the left. Here's another photo of Charles Goldman and his wife, Lizzie. They are sitting on the Eagle Hotel porch. and they are the couple in the center. And then here's another photo of just some dairy silk mill office workers. You can see some of the, there's a little calendar in the background, some of the different things in the picture. It's very hard with some of these pictures because they are rather old and kind of reflect a little bit of light. Okay, this is a picture of the dairy silk mill workers outside in 1913. You can see they're all very nicely dressed, so this would have been some sort of picnic, celebration, get-together at the dairy silk mill. So dairy tried to corner the silk market in 1920. So what he did was, he wanted to be even bigger than he was, okay? So he issued bonds to raise funds, but they were over-evaluated because he was inflating his inventory. So what he was doing was, they were counting the inventory, and then they were going back and recounting it and adding it on to that. So, and unfortunately, that was discovered. So by August 29th, 1923, the Dairy Silk Company was reorganized and became Amalgamated Silk Mills. George Dairy was left with 4 mills. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Catasauqua, but you know, George Dairy had one of the biggest mansions in Catasauqua. You have Millionaires Row in Catasauqua, and he had one of the biggest mansions. He lost his mansion. He ended up moving into a house with one of his children, and eventually he ended up living in Bethlehem with his daughter until he died. So this is a present day view. Can't see any dairy silk mill there anymore. I believe the property was later purchased by Rodale.
It was Square D.
It was what?
It was Square D, the Rodale Electronics.
Square D.
Yeah, which is why that was a Superfund site.
Okay, so yes, I was going to get to that. It is a Superfund site. What you see here is it's very nicely landscaped there, but then in the middle of the picture, I know you can't see it, but it is a wooden fence. There's a wooden fence and there's wire fence, everything around the property. There is a building in the middle. I mean, if you go and kind of look through one of the doors, but it is, yeah, it is a Superfund site. All right, next silk mill is Frederick Silk Mill. In 1908, Frederick Silk Mill was built at Ridge and Keystone Streets. And it was built by Jonas H. Frederick. You see J.H. Frederick. This is once again a J.H. Moore postcard, and this is what the original 1908 silk mill looked like. This mill employed more than 60 people. Jonas H. Frederick had already established the Central Silk Company in Siegfried in 1905, and in 1910 he purchased the Bath Silk Mill, which employed 80 people. So this was a smaller operation than Keystone or than H.D. Tremblay. In 1912, he established a silk throwing mill in Percy, which also employed 75 people. So here's Jonas Frederick. He was a local man, born in Limeport, Pennsylvania in 1875. He was reared on a farm, educated in local public schools, and he attended the American Commercial College of Allentown, graduated in 1896. He then served an apprenticeship in various positions as weaver and warper at the Keystone Silk Mill, so he learned a lot at Keystone. He studied every aspect of the business in order to be qualified to oversee and manage others in the silk industry. Mr. Frederick married Quinnie France in 1898, and they had 3 children. They resided at the southeast corner of 3rd and Ridge in Emaus, a house erected by Mr. Frederick in 1914. That's a picture of his house right there. This house was one of the finest in Emaus at the time, built for comfort and convenience. Mr. Frederick was active in the community and honored and respected by all in policies. His skills in business and people management allowed him to prosper in the business community in Emaus and beyond. So does anyone recognize that house now? John Zettlemoyer's house, yes, yes. Okay, this is a picture of the Frederick Silk Mill workers in the front of the building. You can see it's a smaller group. It was a smaller mill. And this is, early 1900s. And you can see, I'm not sure if there are any men in that picture. The majority of them are women.
Second from the left at the top.
That's what I thought, in the back.
Yeah.
Right. We have another picture, also in front of the Frederick Silk Mill. There are a few men in that picture, but once again, it was a smaller operation. All right, this is the interior of the Frederick Silk Mill. I love these interiors. I'm so happy that we've been able to collect a few of these very old pictures, but very typical of the other silk mill pictures as well. These are with the workers at their stations. Okay, and then Frederick decided to open the Emaus throwing plant. It was opened up in 1919. So he also had a throwing mill separate from the silk mill. Here's an ad from 1926 that he placed in the Morning Call. J.H. Frederick Silk Mills, Emaus, Pennsylvania. And this is another view of the Frederick Silk Mill, just a little different angle. And once again, this is a very similar view of it, very similar to the J.H. Moore postcard that we started out with. And here's the present day view. Almost unrecognizable.
Right.
But this later became the Emaus Pajama Factory before, some of the other businesses that went in there. Okay, we are now on to the Zollinger and Schroth Inc. Silk Mill. This is the first building of the Zollinger Silk Mill. So it was originally the Zollinger Silk Mill, 1916. It was a one-story building. And this was recently donated to us by Bill Bartow, so we thank him for that. Would never have known that that's what the silk mill back in 1916 looked like. This is something I can thank Jim, right? Jim Schwartz pulled this one out of the Morning Call. 1918, bonds were called, the following bonds of Hemmer Silk Mill. So I don't know whether Hemmer Silk Mill was in business or operating, but they did have bonds, which meant they were trying to raise money. And it then became the Zollinger Silk Mill, so maybe Zollinger purchased some of these things, I'm not quite sure, but they've been called for redemption. And then here's the second edition. Excavation begins on April 11th, 1918. So you saw the first piece, which was 1916 to 1917. Then A.P. Hauser began excavating again. The first picture of the building was 60 by 130. He was adding on another 60 by 130 up to the Zollinger Silk Mill, and that was 1918. And then I thought this was interesting. Now, just think about 1918, World War I. The employees, 96% of the employees at Zollinger Silk Mill purchased Liberty bonds. So that was put in the paper. They were very proud of that. It says, chances are that Emaus will go over the top in raising money for the cause. So, all right, and then this is also from the Morning Call, 1918. Judson Brink, who was a superintendent, this one shocked me, a superintendent of the Zollinger Silk Mill. Now think of all the people that are working in the silk mill. They're all getting very low wages, but they pool their money together and they buy him a gold watch for a Christmas present. I don't know. But anyway, nice present for the boss. Okay. All right, now we come to Zollinger and Schroth Silk Mill. So Zollinger and Schroth Silk Mill was located at the corner of 4th and Furnace Streets and was one of the town's most thriving industries. It employed 210 men and women in the manufacture of broad silk. And the business was founded by Henry Zollinger in 1916 and then continued by him for 2 years until Henry Schroth then became a partner and the business incorporated. So Henry Zollinger was born in Switzerland and learned of manufacturing of textiles in a school in Zurich, Switzerland. He came to the U.S. well-versed in the business in 1891 and took employment in various mills to study the American methods. He resided in New York and was connected to the Phoenix Silk Company for 25 years as a sales manager. Henry Schroth was an American. He was also associated with the Phoenix Silk Mill, but only in the Chicago branch for 16 years. So from the wealth of knowledge of the silk industry and all its phases, these two men were exceptionally well fitted as silk manufacturers. Somehow their paths crossed at Phoenix Silk Mill and they decided to join forces. You can see how this building went from 1 story and fairly small square footage to 3 floors in 1919 and 1920. So does anybody recognize this building nowadays? Yeah. So it's at South 4th and Furnace Streets. It looks very similar to now. I love the cars in this picture, but they certainly are not employee cars. They would have been, cars that may have been owned by the management. It's a very similar building, so we'll show you what it looks like in a little bit. These are interior views of Zollinger Schroth. Basically, very not altogether similar to the other interior views, but these are 2 separate pictures that we have of the interior views of Zollinger and Schroth. Here is the first annual employees picnic of Zollinger and Schroth Silk Mills, and it was held at Bidewee Park in 1922. The man on the far right is Harrison Stephen, and he is Pat Mavis's great-grandfather, and Beanie Mavis's grandfather. He was a foreman in the warping department, and he was a respected and well-known resident of Emaus. In this picture, he is 44 years old. Looks a little bit older than that. With the white hair, right. Bidewee was South 4th, up where the football field is. Above the shelter house. Okay. All right, this is we continue with the first annual picnic. This just shows the large group of people that came to the picnic in 1922. More pictures of Zollinger and Schroth employee picnics in the 1920s. You can see a little bit of the fashion of the day with some of the hats and the hairdos and some of the and we do have a couple vehicles, but it's hard to tell what vehicles there are because they're all sort of in front of them. We do have a few names off to the right. Divdra Diash, Arlene Moss, Emma Zepp, and they were at the Zollinger Silk Mill picnic. So, anybody know, have any relatives? The Zepps? No? Okay. Okay, this is the Zollinger and Schroth throwing department. They were a silk mill that had their own separate throwing department. You remember J.H. Frederick separated his throwing department. He had the Emaus throwing mill plus his silk mill. So this was an employee picnic in 1927. A lot of picnic photos. And this is an envelope we were given of Zollinger and Schroth Inc., Emaus, PA. So, one more Zollinger and Schroth picnic. it was sold to Amalgamated Silk Corporation, which, if you recall, was Dairy Silk. So Dairy Silk, went bankrupt, and Amalgamated Silk was born, and then Amalgamated Silk bought Zollinger and Schroth. And this is the first annual picnic for Amalgamated Silk. And here's the second annual picnic for Amalgamated Silk. I'm amazed at some of the hats in this picture. It's hard to tell, but they all have like these little pointy hats. I'm not sure if they're paper or cloth, but they're, I guess it's just the way they decided to celebrate. And here's another employee picnic picture. You can see a few different hats. There's one right there in the middle, a little bit closer. Okay. And these are a few more pictures, a little bit more recent, although not that much more recent, but these are some of the employees sitting outside of Zollinger Schroth, or Amalgamated, I should say. We keep going on these. You can see a few of the, they even have a dog there. I guess they brought him to work that day. And I'm not sure if the one woman is a Mennonite. She looks like she might be a Mennonite. But you can see, like the second lady from the left in the back row kind of has, one of those little bandana type things on her hair, 1920s. Okay, and this is the present day view of Zollinger and Schroth. Later owned by Amalgamated Silk Company in 1927, and then it turned into General Machine in 1935. So, looks pretty similar. We are now at the Cumberland Silk Mill. This is a picture of the interior of the Cumberland Silk Mill. This one, I don't know, this was one of my first interior pictures that I saw of the interior of a silk mill, and it just sort of, for me, it's just looks a little haunting. But they're the workers at their stations in Cumberland Silk. And this is 1919. Okay. I wasn't sure that Cumberland Silk Mill was in 1919, but I did find some evidence of it. So we can go to the next one. This is an orphan's court sale, okay? Cumberland Silk Mills actually bought 2 vacant lots on the south side of North Street between 5th and 6th Street. So Cumberland Silk Mills was in existence in 1919 at that location. And then Tremont Silk Mill came into play. Cumberland Silk Mill was there until at least 1922. Tremont Silk Mill that came in, they were being operated by the Witter brothers of New York, but they were called Tremont. Although what I found in some of the papers was sometimes it was Tremont, sometimes it was Witter brothers in the same year, and right around the same month. So they kind of went back and forth as to what they called the silk mill. So this is a Tremont Silk Mill interior photo. This is Titus Fegley. He was a weaver. He is Doris Fegley Trumbauer's grandfather. Another Tremont Silk Mill. This is the superintendent, Herman Clerks. Does Clerks ring a bell?
Yes.
Yep. He was the father of Dr. Carl Clerks, the Emaus dentist, and the grandfather of Ingrid Baker. Okay. This is an article I found about a monster outing held in Laudenslager's Grove by the Witter brothers. So the Witter brothers were actually brothers, Adolf, Jacob, and John Witter. And they were the proprietors of the Tremont Silk Mill. But what they did was they had a few other silk mills, so they invited some other silk mill employees to this picnic as well. And there were 400 in attendance. That was a very big picnic. On July 4th, 1925. And There was a large basket of roses and gladioli were presented to the Witter brothers by Herman Clerks, who was the local superintendent. Okay, here's the Tremont Silk Mill, Witter Brothers Picnic 1927, the 5th annual one. These are all management, and it was, they had it at Palm, Pennsylvania. And then here's an interior, a different interior look of the Witter Brothers Silk Mill at 6th and North Street. This is a silk thrower, Margaret Coons at Witter Brothers, and you can see the reeled silk throwing. So you see the way the silk is wound around the reels. Then we have some Witter Brothers silk mill workers. These would have been some of the ones that would have been doing some of the maintenance, I was going to say coal, that kind of thing, so keep going. It was a motley crew. Yes, quite a dirty job. Yep. And this is a parade float that Witter Brothers put in the parade that we had here in 1941. It was celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Emmaus Moravian settlement. Not the church, not the borough. 1741 is when the settlement was here, and there was a 200th anniversary for that. And then we have Witter Brothers trucks. And they don't say Emaus, Pennsylvania. They don't say Emaus, Pennsylvania. They say Emmaus. So I thought that was interesting that later on we got to see some of the ways they delivered. Now, one thing, most of these businesses that I've talked about, the silk mills and everything, most of the businesses are no longer in business. But surprise, surprise, Witter Brothers is still in business. They're located in New York. So they still exist, they just pulled out of Emmaus. So, all right, and this was an interesting, these are Witter Brothers silk mill workers. These are like these photos are from like the 1950s. They would meet at the Quake Club, and sometimes they would be, discussing union things. And this is a present day view. Now, I will tell you, the photo on the left was the last present day view before they took the building down. And the photo on the right is the current present day view. So it became Rodale Press and then housing. Okay, I have a couple little operations that I just wanted to tell you about, and maybe somebody in the crowd will be able to answer one of my questions. The Butts, this is a little article I found. The Butts Company leased a factory building on Moyer Street, and it was formerly occupied by Greibtech Silk Company. Now, Greibtech Silk Company is one of the silk companies. I was not quite sure where it was located, didn't have much information. We don't have any pictures on it. But this building was then used as a ribbon mill. Well, the only ribbon mill I knew of was the one that was located at 7 Jeanne, but apparently there was another ribbon mill because this one was located on Moyer Street. So I'm wondering whether or not there may have been a ribbon mill in the current building that is Hapco. Does anybody know whether anybody knew if there was a ribbon mill in that building at one point? Would have been, 1937, so it's a long time ago. Okay, well, we'll still continue trying to find where Greibtech's really was, but I'm suspecting it might have been in that building. I'm not quite sure.
That's the alley there.
It's the alley right beside, yeah, very close to Jefferson. Okay, and this is an unnamed small silk mill / shop. It later became the Emmaus Bakery. So just picture this. You are inside the Emmaus Bakery. And you know how small the inside of the Emmaus Bakery is, right? So those were silk workers. Now, you don't see the big looms here. They might have been doing some sewing or things like that, but this was, this was a recent donation. We're still getting these. This was, the foreman to the left is George Kelly, and he is the father of Betty Flamish. And I did a present day. I walked into the Emmaus Bakery and I said, I'm from the Emmaus Historical Society. I'm doing a program on silk mills. Can I take a picture? And they said, oh yeah. So now I do believe this picture is actually taken kind of the opposite way. So I'm at the door and looking back into where they now have the kitchen. And I think the other angle was that it was taken from where the kitchen was and looking out to the street.
Yeah.
So if you want to flip back to the other picture real quick. I think that's the that light is probably the street, Main Street,
There's the front door.
front doors and stuff. So, but yeah. Okay, and just want to acknowledge a few people. Andrew, for pulling all those photos and all that memorabilia out for me. The Lehigh Valley History, volumes 1 and 3, or History of Lehigh County, it should be. Newspapers.com, and especially to all the donors who have been generous enough to share their historical treasures with us. We wouldn't have been able to do this program, or it wouldn't have been as interesting without all the photos and everything. So I thank you very much.